What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 predictions for the upcoming 2025 college football season. Up next is the UCLA Bruins. UCLA coming off a pretty reasonable 5-7 year in 2024 into Sean Foster's first year as the head coach for this program. Of course, after Chip Kelly left to go to the Buckeyes of Ohio State in 2024 to be the offensive coordinator. But yet, you look at this team for 2025. I feel like UCLA could be a team that maybe can make a bowl game this year. They probably are a team that definitely has a chance to do that. I mean, their schedule is not horrible, but you look at the roster, it could be a little bit of an upgrade to where they were last year. They still have some playmakers on this roster. You go back to the Chip Kelly era, they had some, playmakers on the roster still after he left. And you look at this team for 2025, obviously you do upgrade with Nico Amaliava at quarterback as, he comes in from the transfer portal. Yeah, we don't know how good he's going to be in this system, but I think he'll be improved from where he was last year at Tennessee. I think he'll be a little bit more consistent as well. And he can also run the football. And then offensively, I think the offensive line is really the only concern that I have for this UCLA team. Defensively, I think it will be solid for this team in 2025. So again, here's the schedule for UCLA. I mean, they do have some tough games on the schedule, but it's not horrible for them. Again, this team was 5-7 last year in 2024. So let's go game by game, and I'll give you my official prediction for UCLA for 2025. They're going to start things off with a home game against Utah on August 30th out of the Big 12. So we do get a former Pac-12 matchup here as a non-conference game. We've seen some schedules out there where a former Pac-12 team is taking on also a former Pac-12 team, but this time as non-conference opponents. We've seen that a lot, pretty much, since last year. You look at this Utah team, I'm having a lot of question marks about this Utah team. Last year was a pretty disappointing year for them. They were expected to probably win it all in the Big 12 last season, but offensively, they have a ton of question marks. I don't know how good their offense is going to be. They've been so inconsistent on that side of the football in the last couple of years. Defensively, I think that they'll be probably, dominant there. They've been pretty good on that defense in the last couple of years, and they've always had been as a team. So this game right here, I think, will be competitive. I think it probably will be a low-scoring defensive battle. It's a game that probably can go either way, but playing at home, that's the difference here for the Bruins. So I think UCLA, the crowd will be fired up for this one. Get really excited for the Sean Foster era in his second year. So I think UCLA does get the win here. They beat Utah at home. Again, a pretty competitive game, low-scoring defensive game, but I'm going to go with Bruins here in that one. And then they got UNLV the next week here on the road. Not going to be an easy game in my opinion, where the Bruins are going to win by at least 40 points. I think this is a game where UCLA is probably only going to win by at least 10 or 14 points, or it could be lesser than that. UNLV is a solid group of 5 team. This team was actually pretty close to making the college football playoff last season. Well, this year they have a first-year head coach in Dan Mullen, but Dan Mullen has a ton of coaching experience. So, yeah, it would not be surprising if UNLV was probably one of the top teams in the Mountain West this year. So, yeah, I think UCLA will beat them, but only by at least like 10 or 14 points, or even lesser than that. But I think that's going to get them to 2-0. And then after that, they do play New Mexico. I think that's probably going to be the easiest win on this entire schedule for UCLA in 2025, where they score a bunch of points. And I got this team starting off 3-0, going into conference play the rest of the way. They actually get a bye week before playing their first conference game at Northwestern here on September 27th. A Northwestern team that I think could be sneaky good this year. Not a bad team. I'm just really having a tough time figuring out how good this team is actually going to be. I think they could be sneaky good. And plus, this one is on the road. It's not a really tough place to play, but it's kind of a pretty even matchup here in my opinion. I think the Wildcats at Northwestern playing at home, that's really going to be the difference. And plus, UCLA might be looking ahead to next week's game against Penn State, because if they had a bye week before playing Penn State, they would probably be focused in this game against Northwestern, but they probably are looking ahead to that game against Penn State the next week, and I think that's going to cost them here against Northwestern. So I think playing on the road, that's going to be a Northwestern win. So I'm going to go with the Wildcats at Northwestern to get the win, and that's going to give UCLA their first loss of the season. That's going to put them at 3-1. Then they play at home against Penn State on October 4th. I don't really see this game being all that close. I know UCLA is like, playing at home, and Penn State has to travel out west and everything. But you look at this Penn State team, a lot of talent on this roster, and they do have a ton of experience. And Drew Aller is back at quarterback, and he's a guy that I do trust a lot more than Nico Amaliava. So I think Penn State does win this one fairly easily. Not a blowout. I think it's probably like a 14 to 17 point win. So that's going to be back-to-back losses here for UCLA. That's going to put them at 3-2. And then they play Michigan State next here on the road on October the 11th. A Michigan State team that's kind of similar to UCLA. They're trying to turn things around after like a pretty reasonable 5-7 year in their first year, as with their head coach as well from last season. Yeah, I think this is a pretty even matchup. I feel like both teams are pretty even. You look at UCLA, though, going into this game, maybe they're a little bit beat up, especially after playing a physical Penn State defense from last week. And yeah, I think that's going to cost UCLA in this game as well. And plus, this one's on the road. This is a pretty tough place to play. I'm going Michigan State here to get the win. So again, a pretty even matchup there. 50-50 game. I'm going to go with the Spartans, though, to get the win. So that's 3 losses in a row for UCLA after starting off 3-0. But then they play Maryland next here on October 18th. This is a game that I don't really expect to be all that close, though. You look at this Maryland team, they're not really a team that I'm pretty high on. I have nothing against this team, but they lost so much production from last year. They have so many questions on the offensive side of the football. Defense probably could be pretty average, but I think UCLA playing at home, they finally get their first conference win of the year, and they do finally bounce back after 3 losses in a row. So that's going to put them now at 4-3. Then it's Indiana on the road here on October 25th, an Indiana team that it's not going to be really bad compared to last year, in my opinion. I think a lot of people are kind of expecting Indiana to drop off, but I think this team will be just fine. They do have Mendoza coming in at quarterback, and he's a guy that can run the football, so I think that probably will wear down this UCLA defense. I think this game is a lot closer compared to last year, because you look at the score from last year, it was pretty ugly for the Bruins, especially when they had to lose at home. So this time on the road, that's kind of a tough place to play, but I think UCLA will make this a close game. I'm going to go with Indiana here. The home field advantage will make the difference here. So I'm going Indiana in that game. That's going to put UCLA now back at 500. That's going to put them here at 4-4. Then they get their second bye week before playing Nebraska at home on November 8th. A Nebraska team that I think could be a lot improved from where they were in the last couple of years. Matt Rule, I think, has got this program heading in the right direction. UCLA does get a bye week before playing this game. I actually pick the Bruins to win this game because I feel like UCLA is going to get a big win somewhere, and you never know. Nebraska probably could be sitting here as a top 25 team, and I think on paper Nebraska is definitely the better team, and Dylan Raiola is a great quarterback, but Nebraska has to travel out west, and obviously UCLA does get the bye week before playing this game. I think that's going to help out a lot, so I'm going with the Bruins here to get the win. I think with that time and extra time to get ready for this game, that's going to help out UCLA a lot. So I think UCLA gets a much needed win here against Nebraska here in the month of November. That's going to put them at 5-4. Then it's a road game against Ohio State here in the next week on November 15th. Pretty similar to the Penn State game, except this one is on the road. Yeah, no chance here for UCLA. I don't think they're really quite to that level of the Buckeyes just yet. So I think UCLA does fall pretty big in this one. That's going to put them back at 500 on the season. That's going to put them at 5-5. And then it's a home game against Washington on November 22nd. Pretty even matchup here, in my opinion. You got 2 second-year head coaches here. I think Jed Fish is the better coach, but you look at this UCLA team, they're playing at home. That could be the big difference here. If it was at Seattle and Washington, I would definitely pick the Huskies. But again, I look at the 2 rosters. I think it's pretty even between these 2 teams. Washington going to be a sneaky good team in the Big Ten this year as well. But I got to go with UCLA. I think they also get another big win here against like Washington. But they could probably, split between those games. Maybe they lose to Washington, and then they probably beat Nebraska. But, I mean, anything is possible here in this one. But I'm going to go with Washington here to get, or actually UCLA to get the win. And then they close things out with a road game against USC on November 29th. Obviously, the rivalry game here, we've seen, this rivalry go back and forth at times. But USC, I think, is going to be a little bit improved this year. Offensively, we know they have a pretty explosive offense. Defensively, they're trying to, take some strides forward with that defense. I think it could take a big step up this year. year, in my opinion. These two teams, again, I think are pretty dead even. I think USC probably has the better roster and the better talent because USC is a storied program and everything. But I think this offense, I think both of these offenses would probably go back and forth. I mean, this game could probably go either way. It could be a shootout. It could be a low-scoring defensive battle, depending on how USC's defense plays. But I think in the second half, I think that's where USC will probably, create some momentum. And I think it's a game where USC is going to have a last-second turnover, and I think UCLA will fall in this one. So I think USC's defense will force a turnover here at the end of the day, and I think the Trojans do get the win here in this rivalry game. So I got UCLA finishing 6-6. So that's going to be enough here to put them into a bowl game. Again, I think that's an improvement from where they were last year. This schedule is a little bit tough when you got Ohio State and Penn State both on the schedule, but obviously no Oregon, which I think is good news. But you have some very tough road games, but I can definitely see them, possibly winning one of those two road games against either Northwestern or Michigan State. And like I said, they could probably split here between Nebraska and Washington and probably, lose to Washington but beat Nebraska. The prediction will not change, though. I feel like they will still go 6-6. I think 6-6, maybe 7-5 or 5-7. Those are probably the most likely records for this team, in my opinion. But again, 6-6 is what I'm going to go with here for UCLA. So that's my prediction for the Bruins for 2025. Do you guys agree or disagree with this prediction? Give me your prediction for UCLA down in the comments below. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.